I'm so very happy that you're here with us again.
Thank you, Pascal. It's fun to be here.
One of the things that I think all of us who have heard you speak before realize is that in asking uh, any number of questions that might pop into our minds of you, that it's not possible to just have a simple out of context answer.
It may not be possible to have an answer at all.
And that one of the things that we have to do is to understand and appreciate the framework and the larger context from which you're operating and in which you understand the sorts of things that we're asking about. So the first set of questions that I thought we might go over this morning have to do with sanskaras and have to do with uh, that basic athletic context of winding and unwinding sanskaras. And perhaps if we deal with that kind of material first, then as we go on through the day, we can deal with other questions with that as our basic background.
Fine, fine.
Um, a question that came up from a number of people had to do with whether you could explain a little bit further the characteristics of so-called unwinders. How does the
They are an evil bunch, Pascal. But I interrupted you.
well, probably quite at the right time. The question continued, asking, what is the experience of unwinding like, and how does it differ from the experience of winding, and is it possible to um, say something about any either the subjective experience or any uh, uh, observable characteristics of someone who is unwinding as opposed to winding?
Yes. Well, let me let me first wind and then unwind some generalizations that that might frame that. First, yes, it's perfectly possible for certain people to uh, to identify at a glance people who are unwinding. And spiritual teachers do that. They they uh, they take a glance and they feel a pulsation which the person does not feel, and they see a kind of radiance which the person does not know he carries. Often, indeed, if you ask him if he carried any radiance, he would say, at most with a flashlight. the So that people tend to respond subjectively to what the first level of their personality might be in that lifetime, the first sheath of the layers of karma that form the sanskaric web on the top layer for that lifetime. And people are obliged to give that meaning. they are obliged to work with that, to see that, to feel those forces, and uh, and to think of their own selfhood in those terms. The so that people themselves are not good judges of where they may stand on any kind of a continuum of that sort. But but there is from them. Um, you see, they carry with them a totality of their background, and it is inescapable. So, uh, so they carry it, and it actually shines through their eyes, and it shines through the pattern of their eyes. But so it is discernible, and but it is not discernible to them. They cannot look in the mirror and say, "Aha." Check those eyes. Because in their own life, they are obliged first to use their eyes for sight. And until their eyes have been fully used for sight in that lifetime, they cannot see within their own eyes or within the eyes of others vision. But um, but vision is not some poetic metaphor. Someone who has vision has it streaming out of his eyes. And but of course, that vision is never his. So he can't look in the mirror at his own eyes and see vision streaming out. If he has any vision, it's God's, not his. And he has been entrusted to, to have it stream through his eyes. So, as long as people are concerned about their own selfhood, they will not be able to very fully judge. Sometimes people come up to me and will say that that they're having problems that stem from the excess of their spiritual advancement, and and this excess is so effulgent and flowing that uh, that uh, that they seek my counsel first to verify that flow, and then secondly, ordinarily they tell me what to do. They give me advice. But I made a comment in jest, and it is partly in jest, but only partly, when uh, when I said, "Oh, the characteristics of unwinders is that they're such an evil bunch." And what I meant by that, of course, is that they're people who have uh, who have had a fullness of experience that is so broad in living, so varied, so so all inclusive, that that they must be restricted from a precise knowledge of it. Meher Baba said, today's saints are yesterday's sinners, and uh, and one might think of today's spiritual aspirants are yesterday's saints and yesterday's sinners, and tomorrow's saints and tomorrow's sinners. Just if you take, they are going through periods, therefore, when they are inclined to uh, to see and feel certain things. The inclination to see and feel certain things is, of course, based on the past. We talked about that in our last session, and the way in which human beings collect and articulate energy in the form of knowledge and experience and ideas, and the way in which then they release that to higher learning and to higher knowing as they unwind samskaras. When they when they release that, there is at all levels, all realms of creation. There is within all social structure, and there is within all psychological structure a strong inclination to regulate the force within that structure by honoring the structure, by repeating, staying within the confines of thought and feeling of any of those structures. All structures, all boundaries in creation then seek to hold form in a particular pattern, seek to hold it and not give it up. Spiritual students who are unwinding then are caught by the forces of what they were in the past, how that past, that energy from the past has been recast into a structure of personality for the present, and how that will be recast again as they learn and modify themselves, or as they themselves are modified. So spiritual students are always invited to repeat, to hold on, to honor the structure. That honoring the structure of thought or feeling or behavior or whatever, when it has outgrown its potential for personal learning, honoring that structure is called evil. It is simply the repetition of forces beyond for their own purposes. And when one has passed the point of learning from it, that notion of the strong compelling force of all existing forms, be they the form of a crystal or the form of a leaf or the form of a sheath of consciousness, to hold its own shape, to honor its own being, to divinize its here and nowness. That's important. It's important. One has to learn by honoring that. But then, as the learning is past, the form changes. The structure of the mind changes. The way in which energy is channeled through the frame, through the sheaths of what is called the human mind changes. And spiritual students are invited to change. This change is grippingly difficult. It is anguishingly difficult. People, people hold on to their beings with all their force, and they often wrench the final life out of the being of what they are just before they release their grasp, so that people have a hard time, a very hard time, learning to learn. And because there's a stopgap, there's a period between the exhaustion of the form you have been and the revitalization of the form you are to become, what you are to think and feel. That stopgap is anguishing and distressing and felt by everyone. It is felt and refelt again. And it is at such points when one has lost, people say they've lost their bearings, they've lost their direction, they don't know, meaning has changed, life has changed. And they are at bay on a sea of forces that they don't understand. Well, at such times, people must draw on their faith and intuition, and because that's all they will experience. Well, one of the points I want to make then is that people who unwind are changeable. They are obliged to change. Oh, they don't want to. They fight it. They work hard. They work hard against it. But they are obliged to change because their changes must be in thought and feeling. And the reason for that is that as they have used up a certain kind of thought and feeling, which quite frankly is lodged in sanskaric threads in different parts of their physical body. As they have used it up, the threads are loosened and the structure of the mind changes. Well, as the structure of the mind is changing, people are caught in these dilemmas. Their mind is now here, now there. Their views are up and down. The forces that have formerly coursed through them in orderly and helpful ways are now raging here, now raging there, now puffing this out, now pushing this out. And they have to go about, they have to live through a period of modification and change. And they have to live through it not once, but many times. So that one of the characteristics of people who are unwinding is that they gradually lose faith in a great many things that they formerly thought were important. Money, controlling others, organizing yourself this way or that way, having the children behave that way, getting this kind of grade or that kind of grade, living in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. They gradually lose the faith in many of those things. And their faith, of course, is transformed. What they can hold on to is always something different and always something higher. And what they hold on to, they eventually discover they are not holding on to, it is holding on to them. They simply let it hold on to them more tightly and at higher levels by learning to yield to it. Okay, so they're changeable. They go through, and they go through periods because they are obliged to, of behaving often in reprehensible ways. They have to do things. They have to think feelings. They have to engage in acts, which later they will disapprove of. It's funny to see how fully they engage themselves in it and then how fully they disapprove of it. And it is almost to that exact algebraic equation that they disapprove of it in their children. Uh, they forget. They get caught up in being what they are now, and they forget what they were. And, uh, and they forget to use the understanding that comes with knowing what you have been in that life and charting the progress of what you have become. That's so. So there are those changes. They discover that what they used to think of as divine is now limited. What they used to evaluate as the right way of living, they often see now as, from a different perspective, as a quite limited way of living. And they wonder how they could have lived that way, and especially they wonder how they could have forced others to live that way. So they're guilty. They go through periods of guilt and distress. And they should. They should. Guilt is simply the word assigned to unkinking Sanskaric threads. In psychology, it is called insight. It is, it is real learning. And it's a kind of learning based on fundamental experience. It's a different kind of learning than all of us would like to do. We would like to learn, thank you, without kinking and unkinking. It is such a mess, and it hurts so much. And it is such a vivid process of the unattractive side of life that, uh, that we would all like to just get it straight in our heads and have it straight in our heads well. It will never be straight in your heads until it is straight in your feet, knees, torso, and heart. You have to feel it out, live it out, and know it. And, and that is not easy. Uh, so, which brings me to another characteristic of people who are unwinding. They know very fully that it is not easy. They know very fully that it cannot be accomplished, that growth cannot be accomplished by recourse to some efficient psychological formulation that lets you trip over the surface of, uh, of the lily pads. They're accustomed to having the lily pad fall beneath them. You see, it must. The lily pads must fall. People must fail. It's an awful thing to say. People must fail in significant things. People, because failure is what they is the opposite of what they think is right, what they think will solve their problems, what they know to be good. Well, they have to have an expanded experience of what right is, what good is, and they must fail. The people, it's curious the way in which people fail. The, you see, everyone learns gradually that he is a very big failure. You can't, you're not supposed to learn it too quickly. And you're not supposed to learn it too profoundly. Because then you get all depressed and you can't mobilize enough energy to crawl along. But if you know yourself very well, and if uh, and if you are periodically inspired by what lives and selves can be, then you recognize, oh dear, how far away I am. And how unimportant I am. And uh, and how foolish I have been. And you see, life is gradually learning to come to grips with one's own limitations so he can give them up. Or have them taken from him. So, another characteristic of people who are engaged in that process is that they, they tend to experience how difficult it is to learn. One of the other things, of course, they earn a great respect for, and this is gradual. And that is how important it is for them to try their best, but how peculiar it is that things always turn out differently from what they had in mind. So that, and this is one of the places where we actually leave contemporary psychology. Contemporary psychology often draws its power and force and interest by the promise of getting things straight and being able to organize your life and getting it all just going right down there and doing things right and getting this and pulling this string and pulling that one and forcing this feeling and handling that repression, and then it will just all turn out in this way. They used to call those techniques magic. Magic was an understanding of the principles of the universe so that, so that you could manipulate those principles to accomplish your own whim. And that is the way in which magic was defined as different from from higher spirituality, in which one entreats the higher forces uh, to to take one over, and in which one hopes to merit the privilege of access to participation in them. It's a very different thing. Contemporary psychology very often then has the aspect of magic. This much hostility, this much romantic love, dashed with this frequency of sexual encounter, and bingo, you should be happy. It's by formula and it's by rational design, and it holds the promise of control over life and destiny. One of the things that spiritual aspirants learn, of course, is that they're obliged to try and they're obliged to work their very best, but control of destiny is outside their realm. Later, as they learn, they're so happy for it. They're so happy that they couldn't have it the way they wanted it, and consolidated forever their ignorance. They are so happy. They very often discover that the most gripping failure in life was, in its own way, a wonderful achievement. They learned so much. And so they gradually adopt that attitude, and it is based on their own experience. It is based on their own experience, and because their experience will bring about structural changes in their motivation, in their mind, and in their psychology. That is not the case. That is not the case with people, necessarily the case with people who are winding. They should believe what I have just explained to you, you would not believe. You see, they should have faith in in uh, in working towards a specific goal around a specific end, and their lives are cast in that direction. Their lives are cast in that direction. I mean, their lives. Your lives have been cast in that direction. But the whole structure of learning is different. For example, in such a life, in a winding life, it is expected that you learn a certain block, you consolidate a certain kind of learning, and then you drop your physical body, and what do? You then review it, and you expand your learning because of that review. It falls into place, and you whip into another life. But how does that differ for people who are unwinding? That's a rhetorical question. It does differ. It does differ. Because you are obliged, if you are unwinding, to relive and review your death as you go along. As you unwind the part of you that has been placed in, that has had living form, dies. And you are obliged to unkink and to review while you are alive. You are to review the limitations of your former idiocy. You are to do that while you are alive. You don't wait until you're dead. You don't put it off. It cannot be put off. Spiritual principles push you not to put that off, and the unwinding process cannot proceed if you put it off. If you put it off successfully, you'll just wind yourself back up. So people are obliged to learn and review experiences in this life while they are still alive, while they are still incarnate. And they have to, and that is the burning fire of spiritual learning. And not only do they review it, they are expected to put the product of that learning into living reality. You see, in the so-called, in the usual astral phases, when you've died and you're reviewing, you wish you, and you are faced with your limitations, then you begin to think, oh, good heavens, there's nothing I can do about it here. You know, what a thing to have missed, to have taken this, and here I am, removed from earth, and I cannot change it. I have to wait until I go back to change it. But if you are unwinding, you have the privilege of changing it now. You have the obligation of changing it. If you don't change it, if you don't put into effect this new learning, you hold it, you force it back into your very flesh, and you stop the process. So that is why that's a different thing. Do you get that? I mean, that's a different process. The process of, uh, of winding usually doesn't include that. It may include part of it in very late maturity. But, uh, but do you know, look at you, you tend to be young. And why, many of you have 25, 50, maybe more years of learning to deal with this process. Isn't that happy? You see, you, you must learn to deal with the process. And you have in spiritual lives in which you have the privilege of some unwinding, you have the privilege of speeding the process by getting with it. And you have the privilege of, of consolidating those parts of your deeper nature which are pushed actually to the surface as, as layers are removed. There are little holes, little channels during which you get injections of deeper divinity and spiritual learning, which you have learned in the past. And so the process is one in which you have to get quite good. And one of the things that you have to, there is no way out. You get good at this process. And since you will get good at it, and since you must get good at it, and since it is the way in which you release in any given life the cumulative knowing of your best learning from past lives, it is the way you get out on the surface the best of you to live and to give to others. One of the So those are some of the characteristics of both the internal processes and the subjective feelings. And there are some external reference. People will say, I don't know what happened to them. You know, they used to be this way. And now they have become that way. Uh, and, uh, and it seems to me discouraging. People mostly are discouraged by modifications in the behavior, thoughts, and feelings that they are of people they are close to. They don't like it. You change, and someone who has begged you to change and been irritated at you because of the way you are is annoyed. They, uh, they liked to criticize the way you were. They don't like the recognition of what you are to be, what you have become. And if you have become that, who knows what the future holds? The people who change that much in a lifetime make other people very uncomfortable. They, uh, they make their brothers and sisters uncomfortable. They make their parents uncomfortable. I don't know what's happened to him. He's joined this cult. And his mind seems gone. The, they, they are um, they are a mystery to their companions at work often. Did you see how he smiled? No one in their right mind smiles that way. Did you listen to him hum when he faces these kinds of gripping problems? I don't know. I think he's over repressing. Something's wrong with him. The people are set ajar at modifications in other people, and especially they are set ajar by modifications that they do not understand. They might think you know something they don't know, and they're not about to think it's very good. Uh, you see, one of the things, so that's one of the other things. You will think certain things, you will follow certain principles, and well-educated, perfectly well brought up, and proper associates of yours won't understand it. So, to the degree that your own life obliges you to follow these internal principles of growth, others will not understand you because the principles are different. Is that a help in kind of setting some perspective on those differences? You see, it is quite wrong. Uh, well, I want to say something else about being good. It is a great bore to uh, to have people think of spirituality as being good. The Now I know that I've just offended you, and I hope now that I can recover from this. that, but you see, good is learning. Good, good is having courage. Good is internal, and it and increasingly it is internal, and increasingly it may or may not be directly related to external behavior and values of external behavior. So some people who are winding are marvelously good. They are so sweet. They are so lovely. They are so non-conflicted about their sweetness and their loveliness and their purpose. Someone came up to me a few weeks ago and said, "Oh, so-and-so, isn't it wonderful to have so-and-so living among us on earth? A great saint, so-and-so." I said, that person is a wonderful person, but is not a great saint. That person is focused in this life on winding marvelously good sanskaras, and is a model of saintly behavior, totally unlike a real saint. What I mean by that is that the model of behavior is saintly. The word said, follow a kind and good and unvarying quality of goodness. This why this person has been good her entire life and uh, is a wonderful, beautiful, radiantly lovely, marvelous addition to the world, as all you have been, as all you have been in certain lives when you were permitted the freedom of learning from a sharp perspective, a consolidated and consistent kind of good. But you don't have that in this life. You have a deeper kind of good, a deeper kind of balancing in good. Do you see what I mean? It seems so important that so often judgments are made on behavior and on a particular kind of life. There are tremendously spiritual lives that certainly don't look it because, because they are accomplishing yeoman's cosmic work in balancing divine energy. Now, one of the nice things about unwinding is that you do learn about about how limited you have been. I mean, it's embarrassing, it's humiliating, it's anguishing, and it's the last thing you want to learn, but you learn it. and having learned that, you have the privilege of living a different set of principles. So you have the extraordinary privilege of making up in this life for some of your ignorances of the past. And that's a wonderful privilege. It's a really, it's just wonderful to be able to do that. It is such fun. It is such delight. It is so rewarding because it doesn't matter what what the it is what the effects appear to be from other people. It's just fun to do it. So you are given the privilege of a certain kind of new fun that that is in itself tremendously rewarding. Well, that's a lot of talk about winding and unwinding. Pascal, uh,
I want to ask you, a few minutes ago, you said something about getting to a point where it would be possible to join in the process and speed up the process of unwinding. Could you say a little bit more about that?
yes, I can. You know, with I am embarrassed to say that I need a cigarette in order to speak. And You see, I may never unwind these. Uh, the last thing that will be holding me in creation will be a cigarette. Maybe also a cup of coffee. Someone asked on one of these questions, would I speak of the spiritual implications of tobacco, uh, sugar, and coffee? If they'd just thrown in butter, they would have lumped the cluster of my weaknesses in life. I can't speak on those issues, they're too intimate. with, um, with the unwinding process, you see, when you unwind, when you have unwinding simply means in this life that you have processed the energy and the forms of that energy that you have brought with you into this life. And you have processed it, kind of burned it out, used it up. And then when you have done that, those layers gradually that coded that knowledge and that energy are released. When they are released, they restructure your mind and they restructure consciousness. And when they are released, something else happens, and that is that they release the mechanisms that held your certain previous lives in which you had done the same thing. You had learned and you had refined and you had purified and you had spiritualized your learning. Then those many of those layers of previous refinement then are released, and they are released with the layer from this life, and the mind is restructured. It is the restructuring of that mind, which and the culling on the knowing from past lives, the intuitive knowing, the past knowing, the radiant knowing one has had in the past and earned in the past, is now becomes available, and the mind changes its shape. When that happens, and as that process happens, one makes an extraordinary discovery. And the discovery, the living discovery, which is felt pervasively in parts of his being, is that uh, he is no longer himself. He is no longer one, separate. That uh, that that there are qualities, dimensions of existence which uh, which have such strong meaning, such strong force in his knowing, that that he can no longer exist alone. He cannot exist alone. And one of the things that happens is that he, at some layer, he is drawn to others who know that. And he is drawn, he also begins to make the discovery that that there isn't anything really in life of any meaning except love. It's embarrassing to make that discovery. One wonders what in the world he fooled around with getting a PhD for. It's good not to know that too soon. But people then gradually learn those lessons, and they learn it in different degrees. And they learn, in fact, that the force of love, and there are many levels of love, many, is so strong and so powerful that it cannot be managed on one's own. That, that in fact, even to balance one, the love must be recognized as being tied, being bound, going in a channel, actually a living channel of life, to other beings, and especially often a central being. And that central being is a guru. Now, people then have their own ways of recognizing and knowing and honoring this powerful force. And there is a kind of automatic process that takes place that at some point ties them in their awareness to that being. It does not happen in every life. It which gets us to another set of questions that were asked. But in point of fact, there are lives in which the power of love is so strong in one's being that when it is released, it demands, it absolutely demands a special atmosphere. And it demands, it will not, it is so strong it cannot be shut off. It demands a being to help balance and channel that love. It is so powerful. There is a danger in the unwinding process. Some people that I have worked with have been so overcome with these forces of love that rip through the fabric of their life with such force that they are quite crushing. And people have said to me, is there any way at all that we could divert God's attention from me for a while? I don't think I can survive this crushing force. And that sounds funny. Is there any way that, is there please any way that God could love me less and that I could love him less because I can barely walk. I can't keep my mind straight. My body won't work. The um, the crushing force of the power of God, uh, when it rips through awareness in that way, demands for survival itself. It demands for physical survival itself a guru. People who have not had that experience could not believe it. Do you know there will come a time when they do? Because they will all have that experience. I am sometimes puzzled by discussions uh, among people who say, um, a guru's job is to do this and this and this and this and this. And my relationship to the guru is this and this and this and this and this. And the guru's relationship to God is thus, and so on. One reads arguments and hears discussions about guruship and a good guru and a limited guru and a guru at this level and blah, blah, blah. The all of those discussions, all of those forms of the mind, all of those arguments, they just melt. There comes a time when they melt so fully that the tie is recognized as being unutterable, so deep, so strong. No words will frame it. And it is only spoken of in the language of life itself. There is a lot of talk, a lot of there is a lot about learning about God that is spoken without words. It is spoken, it is communicated in living action. There are no words that match it. There is only a life informed by it. The words and formulations help at certain places to get the cognitive facilities, dazed and changing and waving in the breeze, propped up, so that they will take the right winds of divine force that will keep them on their journey. But the person who props those up, the person who helps with the strength of the wind and the strength of the sail and getting it correct and ensuring that this process does not result in in ensuring the success of this is a guru. Now, this happens, the process, so how does one speed up unwinding? One, uh, one speeds it up by the privilege of recognizing the a being who can aid in it. And that recognition is a recognition so deep, so full, that that it's even hard to speak of it. And when that recognition comes, uh, it comes very forcefully. The, and the only way that one can speed up the process is to live a life informed by its principles. That's how. It's very simple.
Let me then ask Jim, um, how does one, uh, if I understand it correctly, as these sanskaras start to come up again, the tendency would be simply to repeat them and act them out. Is that right?
Yes.
How does one avoid doing that and instead unwind rather than simply rewind or reinforce?
One does it partly with his heart. People have a hard time understanding this. They are so accustomed to thinking of actions according to the way they look from the outside. They have a very difficult time thinking of what those actions communicate from the inside. They may be obliged to do things that look terrible, but if they do them with love, if they dedicate with all their being of love that action to their highest knowing of God, then that is one way. You see, God is the author of every behavioral pattern. God is the creator of every dilemma you face. God is the designer of every sin and the force behind the release from that sin, which is simply releasing the energy from that limited learning into a higher form of learning. So part of it has to do, see, people reserve terrible things for themselves and good things for God. They think, oh, I do this and it's terrible. It's terrible what I'm doing. God wouldn't approve. I'm going to run and pray about it afterwards. But for now, I must do it. If they would pray about it at the time, if they would just pray about it at the time, then uh, then the action itself would change. The purpose itself would change, and they would offer it as best they are able to offer it to its creator.